Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Randy Bach, and I'm here with the Newton Taxpayer Association for Taxpayer Talk. We can be found on Facebook at Newton Taxpayer Association. We'd love to hear from you and about you. And we've been pretty busy and active these days with the recent last year override and some of the municipal elections on the odd year. And we've never stopped having fun fighting the good fight in Newton. And our most recent one has been regarding the recent and not quite lamented Newton Teachers Association teachers union strike, which was an illegal strike yet occurred. And we're here today with Professor of Finance at BC, Jeffrey Pontiff, to talk about some of the things that happened in Newton and will happen in Newton as we go on, and why this happened and what are the ramifications, repercussions. Jeffrey, well, there we go. Okay, here we are together. What was that? What happened? What was this hurricane teacher strike?
Well, I found it very interesting, and for people that have lived in live in Newton, every 3 or 4 years, the blue shirts come out. You know, when you drop off your 3rd grader at school, that teacher will come out wearing a blue shirt and say, "Look, can you put this sign that you support the educators in your?"
I noticed they're educators.
It always says educators, not "I support the NTA."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can you say I don't support educators, right?
Right.
And so, you know, for as long as I've been here, it's been, teachers have, when the contract renewals come up, you see these actions. This time the union went further and they decided to strike. And strike they did. It was 11 school days that the kids missed. It was an illegal strike. The Massachusetts Teachers Association was, it seems like, involved giving advice to the NTA. And I think it's likely we're going to see more strikes going forward in the state.
Yeah, you make an interesting point. You made one earlier to me privately, mm-hmm. Regarding overrides and teacher strikes. There was a movie, I can't remember, Daniel Day-Lewis, There Might Be Blood, I think it was. And there's a famous scene, it makes no sense, but basically there's oil under this guy's land, there's oil under his land, and he's got a big straw, and he sticks in the other guy's milkshake, and "I will drink your milkshake." Apparently that was like Daniel Day-Lewis, he gets very deeply into these roles. Apparently he ad-libbed that thing. It's a famous thing. But basically, if there is some milkshake in the cup, you're almost rest assured that somebody's going to want to, drink it up if you're not drinking fast enough. So it seems to me almost a permissive aspect, like a moral hazard in a sense, like putting money in front of the street, like what happens, a pot of gold or something like that. That if the money's there, and if you think that even if the money's not there, if you think that the basically the populace will kind of bend and they're not really going to hold a firm line, if you don't draw a line and keep it, then you're going to wind up getting essentially, I don't know what the nice word for fleeced is. You might have some of your coffers raided on a more frequent basis if you are easily able to replenish it. You don't show any resistance to the fact that you've already paid this amount. You've already paid for the schools. You've already paid for the roads. You've already paid for these things. And then what's up with that?
Yes.
So I think there's kind of an aspect where, if I'll just, before I give you a chance to respond, one of my favorite quotes, I've probably used it 18 times here, but it's H.L. Mencken, who's kind of the second generation of Mark Twain, early 20th century. He said, "Democracy is the principle by which the people vote for what they want, and they deserve to get it, good and hard." And so here we have a democratic principle where we elect the people to be in Newton and managing things for us. And they don't really do it that well. I think because, in fact, the Teachers Association, the Teachers Union is the largest contributor, very powerful on election day, and kind of the negotiation, I think, has the NTA interest on both sides of the negotiating table. So I don't think they already have good contracts, and yet it wasn't enough. So I'm going to keep quiet for a second and give you some aspect there maybe you'd want to touch on.
Yeah. So look, let me say a couple things. I have looked at data of how well we pay our teachers and relative to other districts. And if you look over time, it's been pretty stable. So we are in the top about 17–18% of the state. That really hasn't changed. And the other thing, data that I've seen, someone who I won't name showed me data about hiring teachers, and what he found was that the offers we make to hire teachers, we get a pretty nice hit. Our hit rate is pretty good. So like over 95% of the offers that we make for teachers.
So if we are putting offers out and we get a response 95% of the time, we may not be we may be over generous in a sense.
Yeah, or we may not be optimizing. Okay,
that's a finance term.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is the teachers that we are losing. Okay, how many teachers decide to quit teaching, maybe to go to another district? And when you look at those statistics, we're again very similar to our peer districts. So from that data, it seems like our teacher salaries are fair.
Right. So
now, by the way,
yeah.
You did invite some representatives of the union,
Yes.
so we could have their perspective on this too. To be fair.
Yes, I did. I sent out, I think one was Ryan Normandin, and the other was Michael Zillis.
Yes.
And it's an interesting thing. Michael Zillis, was he formerly a teacher?
Yes, he was formerly a teacher.
Or he is formerly a teacher.
He is still being paid, though.
Yeah.
I think part of the contract is he's paid by the city a six-figure salary.
Not to teach.
Not to teach. So it's a great job.
Yeah, no, it's a funny thing. I mean,
he's getting paid to strike.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any analogies, but I've got a couple that come to mind. But sometimes you do that kind of thing under duress, I would think. I mean, it seems silly if there's kind of this bargaining tension that you're paying teachers are your employees, I get, but the union is not necessarily your friend if you're running city government. Unless, of course, it depends for whom the city government is. If it's for the taxpayers, taxpayers, another word for taxpayers is citizens, I guess. You could have them first in mind, or it could be that you have others first in mind, which might be your outside donor supporters. And the donor class is powerful. And my understanding is, I don't know about Newton per se, but I think across the board in elections, that the NEA, the National Teachers Union, basically, is the largest single contributor. And it's a funny thing because, they get their contracts from government.
Well, look, I would like to talk a little bit about the power of the NTA. And I think that there are a couple things. So first of all, I think the perception of people is that Newtonians, voters, support the NTA. And I think that's the perception I think that the NTA leadership has. And I think there is kind of a common problem that people have, okay? One of my problems is when I lose weight, people will tell me, Jeff, you look good. You've lost weight. But when I gain weight, no one says, you look horrible. You've gained weight, right? And I think when it comes to the teachers and striking, they hear and they interact with the parents that go and protest with the teachers. But the other parents don't say you shouldn't be doing this.
That, right.
So their perception is everybody supports them. If you read the Boston Globe, no conservative paper,
Right.
if you read their op-eds, they were incredibly negative about this strike. So I was surprised that the Boston Globe, chose to stick with the kids.
Well, that's a heartening moment.
Yeah. But as far as the NTA in Newton, let me note a couple things. First of all, the NTA always supports overrides. They've never seen an override that they have not liked.
Right.
The last override, they were strong supporters of it, did not pass. They came out against Mayor Fuller and Scott Lennon. Mayor Fuller won. And I would say almost all races where the NTA has endorsed someone, they don't get their picks.
A little bit of a blowback, or a little bit of sharpening of the spine amongst voters.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And I think a part of it is the response to COVID. The schools were locked down in COVID, and I blame first and foremost our elected officials. But certainly the union did not make it easy. They seemed pretty happy having schools locked down. That is one thing. And when that happened, we lost students, we lost families. And when that happens, you're less likely to get support for things like overrides. And the Newton and the NTA seems to be, high-fiving, about their strike.
Well, I think they came out. I don't know who won these kind of things. I think everyone loses. Principally no pun intended. Principally, the students lose.
Yes.
And I guess the NTA got more money than they had yesterday, so they won in a sense. And the fines, which are supposed to be fines, you did something illegal, those are being adjudicated, and the middle part of the word adjudicate is judge. So they're being downwardly ratcheted by a judge, for whom, who is really not necessarily Newton's, City of Newton, or the Newton student's best friend in this case. If somebody does something illegal, if somebody shoplifts from you, I'm not saying this is the same thing, but they're both illegal acts. And if somebody shoplifts from you, you don't negotiate and say, well, look, you took 5 Snicker bars and 3 Coca-Colas. You know what? You get 2 Snicker bars and 1 Coca-Cola. Don't shoplift again for another 3 or 4 years. That's not how things work.
Yep.
There has to be some punishment and consequence, or you wind up, having a lot more of these things, disappearing from your store.
Yes. Essentially, what this judge said was, if you strike for 1 day, we'll fine you $50,000. 2 days, on the second day, we'll fine you $100,000. Third day, then it would go up. But then on the 6th day, he said, "Oh, we're going to go back to $50,000." So
yeah, well, maybe math
not
was
make sense.
math was not maybe the judge's strong point. Who knows?
But anyway, I think the danger for this strike. I think public schools in Newton are good, in that there's a real opportunity for people to go live in our city, and their kids can have friends in their neighborhood that they go to school with. That is good. One outcome, I think, of this strike is many parents are going to say, I don't want to send my kids to Newton public schools. We will go private. Private schools do not strike. If you have a kid in 8th grade, do you want to go to Newton high schools and perhaps have the contract come up? And then, when your child is applying to college and needs teacher recommendations,
so
or they're taking AP classes,
Right.
and the AP
Well, for-
exam date doesn't change even though
Yeah.
there is
My
strike?
Newton students, my kids are men now, so
Mhm.
they're above and beyond, and they've made their way through life to a certain point. I'm not sure the strike part would be the turning point for me, but a lot of things that I saw, my wife and I are reasonably involved parents, and there were some handwriting on the wall, not just graffiti, but back then when they were in school, that came out I think during the COVID era when remote learning turned out that they weren't even remotely learning, or I'm making puns, but it turns out a lot of the stuff they were learning or being taught at the very least was inimical with common decency. People were being shunted into these intersectional race groups, and they had to act like oppressors and oppressed and so forth. And students effectively were pitted against each other. I don't necessarily want to go down the whole CRT alley, but I think a fair amount of parents were just like, okay, the schools aren't open, they're not providing a service, they're staying closed longer than other similar districts. A lot of the data are already there. Sweden had the schools open but for 2 weeks and nobody was dropping dead, so forth, same virus, not that different climate, et cetera. And what are we doing about this? And I think there was a lot of it was very self-serving, and the teachers put up big snit about how they're going to get ill and whatnot. This was not happening. And certainly there could have been some who stayed home if they wanted to, but that wasn't really an issue. But I think it was a combination of the fact that schools were not available, and if there's another COVID, I would worry more about this disease X or whatever they want to call the next thing along. The default position for the schools, teachers, is not to really be out there, frontline, first responders, whatever kind of thing. I think it's much more like, we're getting our salary, we can just do this on Zoom and hang out and watch shows in between. I just think this was a bad look for the Newton schools, and it paid off, or didn't pay off, in a huge detriment and decline in the enrollment.
Yes. So we saw enrollment go down. And my prediction is after this strike, we're going to see enrollment go down again. And as I previously said, as enrollment goes down, the likelihood, so I think that's bad for the city, but the silver lining is the likely of future overrides passing is going to be lower.
Yeah, so I want to go over this point a couple times because I think it's an excellent point you make. Maybe just drill us down. What do you mean by that?
Look, if you think about who are the most likely people to go out there and vote for an override, it's parents of kids that are in schools, that are in the public schools, okay? The other citizens are less likely to vote for the override. Parents that pull their kids out are less likely to vote. Parents that are maybe in Newton public schools and feel like they're doing a bad job, that are anxious about a strike happening, I think they're less likely to vote for an override too. And as we mentioned earlier, if you pass an override and put money in the middle of the city coffers, there's going to be more fighting for it. And how do you fight? You strike.
Right. So it's kind of like I was pretty good at mathematics, so I never played the lottery. No offense to anybody who does, but the people who do, some of my friends who don't do the lottery, when the Powerball numbers go higher and higher, they're more likely to play. So there's more money at the table, a poker game or a lottery or whatever. And there's more money on the table when we are prone to doing overrides. That is an attractive nuisance. It's basically going to prompt more, active striking and so forth, and more aggressive stance. Two things. One is that I ran the campaign of Bill Heck I think a while ago, 2009 perhaps. I ran into the ground. He was running for mayor. We did a reasonable showing. We I think came out ahead of Ken Parker. We didn't win the race in the end of the day, and Seti Warren did. But I was at a party, and unbeknownst to the people at the party, I was not part of their same political movement. And one woman there, she was either she had already been made or was going to be made principal of one of the elementary schools. And she's like, we have to do everything